All right, new polling that could spell trouble for President Biden, the Democrats, is out today. According to a new Politico Morning Consult poll, just 38% of Americans think the country is headed in the right direction under President Biden. Well, check this out. 62% say we're headed down the wrong track. Those are not numbers that politicians like to see. Well, will numbers like these send alarm bells to Democrats heading into the 2022 midterms? Joining us now is David Drucker, senior correspondent for the Washington Examiner and author of a new book called In Trump's Shadow, The Battle for 2024 and the Future of the GOP. David, good to see you.
Great to see you, Sean.
So, look, those numbers, if you're a Republican on Capitol Hill, probably make you feel pretty good going into the midterms. But you talk about 2024 in your book. How do things change if Trump does or does not run again?
Well, it's a very interesting question. I think that if Trump decides to sit 2024 out, you'll see a larger field, right? So there are, I mean, I've counted in Trump's shadow up to 14, almost 14 top-tier Republicans who are major figures in the party, who are looking at a presidential race, who want to run. And obviously, if the former president runs, you're looking at a smaller field. What's interesting to me, and it's based on interviews I've done recently and interviews I've done for the book, is that President Trump running, as strong as his numbers are in the Republican Party, does not necessarily mean that particular Republicans who have been eyeing a 2024 bid since long before last year's reelection campaign are going to sit out. I think a lot of them are going to get into the race when they think the time is right, and then they're going to judge how the campaign unfolds. And as you know, Sean, given that the former president has such high name ID, has such strong support within the party, and has been to this rodeo before, he doesn't have to get in as early as everybody else. And so even though he likes to signal where he's headed often very early, he has the luxury of waiting to see how things look. And I think that other candidates that can't are going to charge ahead, and then they'll make their calculation based on how the field looks and how strong President Trump appears at that time.
David, first of all, I'm going to have to decide, do I read Spicer's book or your book first? This is going to be, I'm going to do it like a quarter toss-up here.
Look, I know it's Sean. I know it's Sean's show, but in Trump's shadow. In Trump's shadow. I'm lobbying.
Okay.
You know what, though? Here's the thing. Hold on. Time out. My book was at least endorsed by Mercedes Schlapp, David Drucker.
That is true.
That's got to be worth something.
It's Sean's book first, then. Sorry, David. But here you go. You're talking about these 14 potential candidates. First of all, who do you think is a surprise in that group of someone who may be running if Trump decides not to run? And also, what other names are out there that you're seeing? Obviously, we've seen Governor Ron DeSantis and several others. But really, is there a surprise candidate, a dark horse maybe?
Well, let me talk to you about a candidate that I think is the most intriguing and the one that surprised me the most in the reporting for In Trump's Shadow, and that is former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. You know, in Washington, he can be very gruff with reporters. He can be very one-note. He didn't always flash a lot of personality. But when I started researching his background and watching him in front of voters and in front of large groups, he's really got a knack for retail politicking. He really knows how to fill up a room and hold an audience's attention. And he's the kind of Republican, came from the traditional wing of the party, obviously worked very well with the former president, and enjoys at least some level of support within the Trump wing of the party. And so I think, for me, he's somebody that people might not expect to be a good candidate that I think is very intriguing. And, you know, obviously, when you're looking at some governors, I'm wondering if, given his battles with President Joe Biden and what he has been dealing with along the border in Texas, if Governor Abbott, if he wins re-election in 2022, becomes a more interesting candidate for president if he decides to run than a lot of people had thought. I think Abbott is somebody who Republicans in Texas tell me wants to run for president, but they wondered if there was going to be any there in terms of a desire or in terms of a story to tell. And all of a sudden, at least Governor Abbott may have a story to tell. Those are two sort of interesting things that I've been following and watching that I think are different than some people might expect.
All right. David Drucker, congratulations on the book. Remember, as Mercedes said, read Radical Nation first, then your book. Congratulations, though. Well done on the book. A lot of great insight in there on 2024.
Hey, I'm Rob Finnerty. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please join the conversation in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe, too. Hit the bell icon to be alerted to breaking news. And remember, there's a whole lot more on Newsmax TV, America's fastest growing cable news network. Newsmax TV, we're real news for real people.